would like to introduce our first panelist, Lynn Simon, FAIA and LEED Fellow. Lynn has more than 22 years of experience in the green building industry. She joined Thornton Tomasetti in 2013 after 19 years of leading her own firm, Simon & Associates, green building consulting firm. Her prior experience includes positions with the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC, Global Green USA, which is a nonprofit dedicated to greening affordable housing, near to my heart. And Lynn's responsibilities include leading the firm's U.S. West Coast building sustainability efforts and managing complex green design and consulting projects. Lynn is also a green building pioneer and leading authority in the industry. We are privileged to have her here with us tonight, and thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lynn Simon, and thank you for the very lovely introduction, and Jennifer, thank you for the invitation today. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share with you a little bit about sort of my journey to how I've got here today in less than 15 minutes. What I've done is I've selected some imagery, some buildings that I think have really been representative of where I have been in my life, and I'm going to share with you why they're important. And you'll hear that there's a theme through these images that have to do with sustainability and well-being. So it was really wonderful to have to actually spend time thinking about this, because most of us don't take the time to think about our lives very often. So I appreciated that opportunity. I am curious, first I'm going to ask, how many of you have either a grandparent or a parent or an aunt or uncle who is either an architect or engineer? A few of you, a couple of you, okay. So I too, my father, who's going to be 88, is an architect. And one of the things that I've learned from him is not so much about designing buildings or building buildings, because we're very different types of architects. And frankly, that's the beauty of becoming an architect, is there's so many different vehicles and ways for you to be an architect. So I have chosen a path of sustainability and healthy buildings. But my father, that wasn't his path. But what he did share with me, next. What he did share with me, because I can't hold my glasses and the clicker and this at the same time, so thank you for helping me. So does anybody know what this building is? Yeah, what is it? It's Los Angeles Union Station. It's where the Amtrak train goes in and out of Los Angeles. And this building is important to me because, for a variety of reasons. I grew up in Los Angeles. It's an iconic building. It's on the National Historic Register. But when I was little, my father, my mom, and my sister, we used to go visit these buildings. We used to go and walk around Olvera Street, which is one of the first Pueblo developments in Los Angeles. We used to go walk through this building, and if you haven't been in this building, it's worth going to see if you're down in Los Angeles. It's also starting to go through a major renovation, which is very exciting. But for me, it wasn't that my dad practiced architecture at home. In fact, he didn't have a drawing table at home, but is that we went and saw buildings. And that's, I think, my influence very early was sort of seeing buildings and experiencing buildings and what were they like. And you can see this building is, classic, was designed by John Parkinson and Donald Parkinson. Who designed also the Los Angeles City Hall, which is another incredible building. And it's really, it's Art Deco Mission Revival, it's streamlined modern. There's a lot of different things happening in here, but it's clearly a building built in Los Angeles. It really has all the influences of those different styles. So just really significant on my upbringing. Next. So does anybody know what this project is? Okay, so this is in Berkeley, and this is designed by Bernard Maybeck, who was an instructor of Julia Morgan. And I did my undergrad at Berkeley, and when I think about what was influential during my years then, which has guided me to where I am today, is really about the connection to nature and the use of materials. And this particular project is really sort of deeply rooted in both the sort of surrounding area, the environment, the context. And you can see there's influences of sustainability written all over this, whether it's the use of concrete, whether it's the large overhangs, it's the trellises, it's the landscaping. And one of the things that I have sort of realized as I was looking at this is that this type of architecture is really a precursor of what we call biophilia or biophilic design, which is really about designing with nature. It's looking at natural materials, natural light, vegetation, view of nature, and other environmental experiences. And at that time, Bernard Maybeck did not coin it that. It was just really beautiful design connecting with nature. And so, again, really deep influences on my life as I went through the School of Architecture there and had this environmental design background. So, again, I didn't set out to be a sustainability consultant back then, which I'll share with you in a minute, but I think all these influences were really important to who I become today. All right, how about the next image? This one's a little bit harder. Okay. This is at the School of Architecture at the University of Washington. This is their undergraduate building. It's Gould Hall. So after taking a couple years off after my undergraduate, I went to graduate school. And there's a couple important lessons for all of you. How many of you are undergraduates in the room? A few of you, okay, and the rest I'm assuming are graduates. So when I was thinking of going back to school, I was trying to decide where I wanted to go and what would be a good place for me. And I applied to 4 schools. And I only got into one of those schools. And I was trying to decide, do I defer, or what do I do? Do I reapply? And after getting into the University of Washington, I went up there, and frankly, it has changed my whole life. And I had no idea that it would do that, and the experiences I had there. And some of those experiences had to do with my being involved in the student architecture organization, AIAS, American Institute of Architecture Students. Do you have a chapter here? How many of you are members of AIAS? Anybody here? A few of you. Okay. It's the best place for networking and experience and connecting with other students, especially if you can go to the forum, which is, I know, their big conference every year. And so when I was at the University of Washington, I was the co-president of the chapter. And then I got involved nationally, and I became the national president of AIAS. And my experience there was about being exposed to sustainability and green building, because it was very early on. The first AIA Committee on the Environment meeting was in Washington, D.C., and I was the student representative. And my whole platform as a student, or president of a student group, was about environmental issues. And this was a long time ago. This was before the word green building and sustainability was part of our standard lexicon and part of codes and policy and all the work we do today. So little did I know that picking a school that was not my first choice, going to a place that gave me opportunities to explore my interests, which at that time I thought was healthcare architecture. So I was convinced that I wanted to do something that was socially minded as an architect, and I thought, oh great, okay, I'll do healthcare. So I worked for a firm, I worked for MBBJ in Seattle, which is a firm that does a lot of healthcare. I was one of the only architecture student. I took a class in the epidemiology department at the medical school, just because I wanted to learn more about sort of what that was all about in terms of how I could impact design if I understood that area of study. And then what I realized when I did my thesis, how many of you are doing your thesis right now? Anybody? A couple of you. Okay. So when I was doing my thesis and exploring what I was going to do, is I chose to do a health and wellness center for Microsoft Corporation. It's purely hypothetical. And I started exploring what healthy buildings were and what it meant to be. And terms like being grounded, connected to nature, of course, daylight, water, how did this all impact design? So you could see I'm starting to transform from being interested in healthcare to being interested in healthy. And again, this did not exist at that time. The term wellness was very unusual to use in a thesis project. So after finishing graduate school, I moved to DC, was part of this organization, and I came back and I started working for firms. And I quickly realized that green building was something that I was really interested in, and it was brand new. And so I then took a job working for the U.S. Green Building Council when I was, I think, the first employee or second employee. And this is important because what I did is diverge from the traditional practice in architecture. And I think, I don't know, in your professional practice, I'm assuming you're looking at other ways to become architects other than being a designer or being in a traditional practice. And that is significant when you make that leap, is what does that mean for me in my career when I'm choosing a path that's not a traditional path? So why don't we go to the next slide? So does anybody know where this building is? Okay, this is in the Presidio. This is the Thoreau Center for Sustainability. You can see also a building on the historic. Well, you can see the bridge there, so it's probably a dead giveaway. But this building. So after I left, I was at the U.S. Green Building Council for about a year, and they moved to D.C. And I said, "No, I'm going to stay in San Francisco." And I decided to move into more of the consulting arena. And I started the Committee on the Environment here in San Francisco at the AIA. And my first client ever was an architect, Marcia Ledum, who called the AIA and said, does anybody know how to do healthy materials consulting or green materials consulting? And because I had been chair of the Committee on the Environment, somebody on the phone said, oh, you should call Lynn. So my first consulting job ever was on this project. LEED was not in our lexicon. Green building was not in our lexicon. All I did was research and develop a protocol for understanding healthy and green building materials. So this project is near and dear to me because it was my first. I developed a relationship with Marcia, who goes till today to being a dear friend. And I think it's important that along the way you will have relationships with people that will affect your life even as you move through your career. So those relationships are, to me, fundamental in our work as professionals and understanding those relationships. So I feel very privileged to be part of that. This building it's a beautiful building. It's worth going to see, and again, significant in my career as an architect. And as a sustainability consultant, so I'm an architect, but when you hear that term, you probably think of traditional practice, a designer. I'm an architect, but I'm a sustainability consultant. And that's the work I've done for 25 years, is sustainability consulting, which means that I work for architects and engineers and building owners and developers to help them green their buildings. So we look at whether it's LEED certification or Green Point rated, or WELL, which is the health and wellness rating system, whether it's developing guidelines. So I've had a chance in San Francisco to work on some really incredible projects. Terminal 2 at San Francisco Airport is one of the jobs that we help green. City Hall, hard to believe, but City Hall has a LEED for existing buildings certification as platinum. The Academy of Sciences, we also got platinum on that one for existing buildings. So a lot of really incredible projects that I've had a chance to work on. Currently, I'm at Thornton Tomasetti, as Mimi mentioned. We're a 1,200-person engineering firm. We're in 37 locations around the world. We are about 60% structural engineering, and the other 40% we do facade, sustainability, existing buildings work. So it's been very interesting for me. I went from an 8-person consulting firm, my own business, and now I'm in a 1,200-person consulting firm. So quite a range of experiences that I'm having in my career. Next building. Anybody know where this is? Las Vegas. Anybody know what project this is? It's City Center. And what did you say? Yeah. So this project is 18 million square feet. It's huge, clearly. My firm worked with another firm, a series of firms, on about 4.5 million square feet of it. And we were the lead and sustainability consultants. And so, our projects were, this is the Mandarin Oriental right here. We consulted on this one. We consulted on this. Anybody know who designed this one? Daniel Libeskind. So I'll share with you some of the architects. Daniel Libeskind, Foster and Partners, Raphael Vanoli, Helmut Jahn, David Rockwell and Rockwell Group, and Gensler. So you can imagine in my career, there's probably no other project that I'll work on that has this size, first of all, this magnitude. And for me, it was about several things, but we also grappled with what does sustainability mean on a project of this size located in the desert? And you sort of think about that. I mean, water is a serious issue in Las Vegas. And I guess what I came to terms with is this project was going to be built anyway, but because we were involved in the project and the client was committed, every project is LEED Gold. We were able to reduce potable water use by 60% in the landscaping, 30 to 43% inside the building. The Mandarin, we had 34% energy savings. We reused 260,000 tons of concrete on the project. So we contributed a tremendous amount to making this as green a project as we could in a setting that is frankly not particularly supportive of building. But it's built up. And so water is a big issue today. I hope many of you are working on projects where you're looking at water reuse. Here in San Francisco, there's the highest standard and requirements for collecting of stormwater and gray water. Any project over 250,000 square feet in San Francisco is required to use gray water and reuse it. So we're in a good place for that, and we need to continue to push these kind of strategies even on crazy big projects like this. And the other thing I'll say about this project is that it was instrumental in market transformation of the people who worked on the building. So all the interior designers, there were 35 different interior designer companies. We educated them all about green building. We helped them understand material selection and indoor air quality. For me, that's important because those firms then go back to their offices and hopefully use that information on other projects. The contractors, all educated on sustainability, reuse of materials, recycled content materials, construction waste management, all things that then we hope they're going to continue to use on other projects. So a significant project, certainly in my career. Today, probably the most significant project, one of the most, is Oceanwide, which is very close to here. It's 2 towers. It's Foster and Partners. One of the towers will be the second tallest tower. And then another really significant project is we do a lot of multifamily affordable housing. So the work that we do as sustainability consultants runs the gamut to affordable housing all the way to large-scale multiple building projects. Because it's not about the building type. It's about the strategies and concepts that you're incorporating and how do you solve the issues relative to the project type you're working on. Lastly, I'll share, so this slide for me is representing where I am today in my life, which is I am still working on buildings. I love buildings. I'm a sustainability consultant. It's first and foremost important to me. And I'm also doing a lot more work with architects and engineers and people who build buildings. I have become a coach, a life coach, executive coach. I work with people now to help their careers and how do they develop their careers to become the best they can be as a professional. And for me, that's really gratifying. It's kind of like coming full circle. I'm helping others look at themselves and support health and wellness for themselves. And we were talking to you about that for your project and how do you support the physicians' health and wellness. I think that's something that's really important today for those of us that work hard on our projects. And I feel like I started with healthcare, went to healthy, went to green building, and now I'm back to looking at sustainability for the human spirit. And for me, it's been very gratifying to see how I've sort of incorporated these issues into my career. And I hope that you're able to do the same. So thank you.
You can leave this one up for right now. Yes, please.
That was timely. That's such a beautiful sound. Our second distinguished speaker is Patricia Olson. Patricia is a registered architect with over 30 years of experience. She holds a PhD in environmental design and planning, a Master of Science in energy efficient and climate responsive architecture, and a Bachelor of Architecture. So it gives you all ideas of things you can keep doing after you. Her career is focused on the advancement of high-performance, healthy, and sustainable architectural design through private practice, teaching, consulting, and owner's project management. As a senior architect in the Office of the University Architect, she managed the design of the Student Pavilion, Arizona State's first net zero energy and zero waste building project. That's great. And she has taught college courses in passive solar design, energy conservation, human health and the built environment, solar and renewable energy, and designing a living building, which I really want to hear more about. So thank you and welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I think I'll sit because I'm tall, and we don't need to look at me. We can look at what I have to say. Thank you for inviting me to share with you today. As you heard, I have a number of degrees. I've spent a lot of my time advancing my knowledge and my education. But amidst all of that, the reason I've done that, the reason I've pursued beyond my Bachelor of Architecture degree is really about the bigger picture of health and wellness, which is without a healthy environment, we can't be healthy. So if we don't take care of where we live and the health of our water, our air, our spirits, everything in our life, we're not going to be able to have that experience. We're not going to be able to build healthy buildings if we don't take care of the environment. So when we get into architecture, what I found was that the umbrella of healthy building and of a sustainable design really encompasses a lot of different areas, from individual health to community health to managing our own personal lifestyles. And all of that becomes under the purview of the architect ultimately. And one of the things I was frustrated with as I was practicing architecture, so before I even went to get my master's degree, I realized that I didn't have enough knowledge to be able to implement some of the strategies that I really wanted to implement, and those being to start with passive design, to use free energy, to design efficiently. So I went back to educate myself. So in doing that, then I gained knowledge to be able to not only do that in practice, but also to start to teach. So I began to teach at a community college in my community, in a 4-year private college. And I was teaching students not what you're doing, not in a professional architecture program, but students in community college who were working on residential construction and seeing the value of what design brings to them and what design brings to their efforts. And then at the private college was Prescott College, which is an environmental college, and that showed me the value of this type of education for those looking at it from the environmental perspective. So they had the environmental knowledge, but they didn't necessarily have the design background or the design knowledge. So as I continued, I finished that degree, I'm working, I really started to see that one of the missing pieces was a little more education that was needed, and that was from the client side. We really weren't able to do all we wanted to do because the clients weren't as receptive. So that spurred me to go on to get my PhD with a focus in sustainable design education, just for that purpose. How do we build momentum for sustainable design through all of our society? So looking at environmental education, design education, and the general public. So ultimately that led to my dissertation, in which I surveyed 300 programs in those 3 areas and found out what the best practices were. One of the interesting pieces of that is that most of those we would consider our grandfathers and grandmothers of sustainable design, not your grandmother, you're an early adopter. Okay, you are, good, okay. You won't take offense. That they were self-educated. This is a new field. This is something we're regaining knowledge of. And so a lot of what you're going to find as you go out and you practice, this is not something that's going to be handed to you. This is something you could seek out. The information is there, and most of those people came to it because of their own interest. It's out there to find. And what's really exciting is 20 or 30 years ago, there was no internet to find it on. So your job has been actually made a little easier because that information is more readily available to you. So go after it. That's really one of the key points that came out of my own research. After having completed my education, I started my own consulting firm, much like Lynn, and I was working as an owner's representative. So I was working from the owner's side, helping them with sustainable design, helping them meet their goals, working with the architect and the contractor. So that was a very interesting position in terms of getting to see this whole process from yet another perspective. And that led to my most recent position, which was as a senior architect at the University Architect's Office. Just for your interest, I was hired as a staff architect. So I was hired for my experience as a project architect, that as I came into that position, the university quickly realized I had these areas of specialty. So my experience got me in the door, but I had a background both in sustainable design, but also historic preservation. And I see historic preservation as falling under that umbrella of sustainable design. It's retaining embodied energy, it's retaining culture, it's retaining those qualities of our community that create that continuum of our aesthetic and our cultural history. So they saw that value, and I quickly was placed in a position where I was the specialist in those 2 areas. So I came in for one reason and got diverted to another and stayed for 10 years because that is where my interests were, and they valued that background. They valued the work I was doing. So I guess one of the points I'd like to make is, in looking at your career, I find education, whether it's more formal education or self-education, is key. That you really want to continue to advance your own knowledge in the areas that you're most interested in, to build your areas of expertise. I heard a statistic that said if you spend 1 hour a day reading something in your field, within 10 years you will be in the top 10% of the people with of knowledge in your area. 1 hour, just spend 1 hour a day learning something new in your field. So I would definitely advocate for a combination of continued learning and seizing opportunities and letting people know where your interests are and getting experience in the areas you're interested in. In terms of well-being, since we're addressing that tonight, I'd just like to tell you I taught a course called Human Health in the Built Environment. It was focused on individual health, but most recently I taught in design, looking at light, color, sound, all of the qualities that make for healthy environments. Last fall I taught a course at ASU called, co-taught it actually, Living Building Challenge. And I have to say the Living Building Challenge is somewhat new to me, but I see it as the direction we're headed in terms of looking at raising the bar, advancing our knowledge and also our practice, just taking that next step. LEED has taken us well along the way, but we also have more. We could give ourselves more challenges and more opportunities through learning from each step. So as we gain knowledge, as we practice it, then we have that in our kit of tools, and we can continue to learn more and advance those areas. So the well-being aspect of design for me has to do from looking at the big picture of the environment, then coming into the community and what the community health is, and then down to your individual health. So I think as architects, we have the special opportunity to address all of those areas. And so I appreciate this opportunity to answer some questions and share what I know and have done in my career. Thank you. Oh, I didn't do my slides. Well, maybe they'll come up in the... Okay. So here I just apologize. This is the project I just mentioned, or was mentioned in my introduction. This is the student pavilion at ASU. It's a net zero energy building. It's a goal because net zero energy has to be proven. So you need a year's data to show that that goal has been met. This is about 75,000 square foot building. This is a south-facing facade, so you can see it's a desert building, very well shaded. So the total window area in this building is around 28%, just about 28%. So keeping the window area to a minimum and moving most of that to the primary view and the view onto the mall on the south side, and then shading it. And there's a terrace on that second level, just at the bottom horizontal portion of the copper there. And that's a nice shaded outdoor space from the second floor. The one in the lower left is a shaded entry covering, which the design is quite lovely. It replicates ripples in water. It's a pattern of rippling water. Water is very important in the desert, and so anything we can do to bring that feeling of water and doing it through the quality of light is really nice in this terrace. Our building is powered, since it's net zero, by solar on the roof, and there's 4 different configurations of solar. There's paneling that serves as shade structures over the terrace. There's roof-mounted solar. We actually mounted solar to the south wall of the mechanical yard, and then there will be solar panels over the mechanical yard, which serve a dual purpose. So not only do they provide solar power, but they shade the equipment, making the equipment more efficient in the desert heat. We also have solar tubes, which bring daylighting not only, and the reason the plan is shown up there is light is brought down from the roof to the 3rd floor, and then those along the corridor there, you see those circles. That's solar tubes being brought down to the second floor. So we're bringing in borrowed light to 2 levels with the solar tubes. This project is a historic preservation project. This is the Grady Gamage Memorial Auditorium on the Tempe campus. This was a challenge because we're looking at an iconic building, and how do we how do you put an addition on a Frank Lloyd Wright building? So we looked at a lot of different options, and really the health and well-being of this project was about reducing the lines to the restroom at intermission. And this has been a 50-year problem in this building. There never were enough restrooms. So this is done symmetrically on either side of the building, and after exploring a lot of options, going underground, remotely tying yet another walkway back into the building, this was a nice successful accomplishment to add 93 fixtures to the facility. And then the third one, this is showing not an addition, but a renovation. And this one is really exciting to me because we took a very utilitarian building, a post office. So you have before and afters, the 3 before and afters. So that's the loading dock, receiving dock for the post office. And then to the right, it's the architect opened up the south facade and brought in daylight and shade covering. So now it's a beautiful patio area. The mail sorting room now is a lounge. And the lower level, which was really wonderful, borrows daylight. So this was a very closed utility corridor in the basement. The classrooms on the left, you can see there are glass panels beside the door. Those rooms open to light wells. So you have borrowed light coming into the hallway and then across into the student tutoring area. So it engaged all levels of the building and brought in more daylight. And so it went from being basically a very dark utility type space, because that's what it was, it's a post office, to very light and open and engaging environment as a student center for the downtown Phoenix campus.
Let me introduce you to. Wow, having to compete with the rain, but thank you. It's getting louder and louder. Third in our distinguished panel this evening is Amy Leedham, Lead AP. Amy is a senior environmental designer at Atelier 10 here in San Francisco. Amy combines her expertise in building physics and a decade of experience in architecture to foster communication between the design team and technical consultants. Drawing on her passion for health and wellness, Amy has supported a variety of project types and sizes to implement healthy building strategies. Amy holds an MArch in Sustainable Environmental Design from the Architectural Association in London and a BS in Architecture from Northeastern University. As I already mentioned, Amy is Lead AP. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with such distinguished panelists as well. It's a pretty big honor to be included on this panel with you ladies, so thank you. I think there's going to be a lot of similar themes to what I've heard from you, which I think is indicative of our kind of approach to health and well-being, but I'll dive right in. So I kind of, similar to Patty, have some images here to kind of talk about my path. So this first image is not a project I designed, but a project that I grew up around. Does anybody know where this is? I'm going to pull from Patty's strategy here. Or sorry, Lynn, sorry. So this is at Princeton University. My mother's molecular biology lab is directly adjacent to this project, and this is just to kind of say that where I grew up at Princeton, I was surrounded by a lot of really great architecture, and similarly, it was just kind of part of my experience. I didn't necessarily, go seek it out, but it was there. I was lucky enough to have architecture classes in my high school, in my public high school, which I took, which led me to work for Michael Graves at the age of 15. So I started my career in architecture way more than a decade ago, but I kind of don't count anything from before I graduated. So I started working in architecture at a very young age, which led me to go to architecture school for undergraduate. There we go. So this is me. What do I do now? As Mimi introduced, I'm an environmental designer with Atelier 10, but I came to this position through kind of a long, convoluted path, sometimes going in the very wrong direction, which was necessary to get me to what I consider now the right direction, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But you know, what does an environmental designer do? What does that mean? And I think the key here is we are consultants, we're green building consultants, but I am very much a designer, so yes, we provide technical expertise, but I also work very closely with architects on design. And I think that's a really important part of my approach to this, is that it's not just, here's your LEED scorecard, this is what you have to do. It's, you know, let's figure out how we can design this together. So it's a very collaborative approach, which allows me to still be a designer and, you know, contribute to how a space ends up being. So this is another way of looking at that. So to me, I put healthy in a small size there, in case you couldn't see that, because to me this is just a building. But since we're talking about healthy buildings, I'm going to include it here. So a healthy building protects health. That's pretty obvious, but in that we mean the kind of basic parameter of avoiding things that are really bad for people, right? So let's eliminate toxins and provide good air quality, those kinds of things, protecting health. Promotes wellness, and so we've had a little bit of discussion about what wellness means in terms of life and architecture. In this case, it's kind of going on that minimum requisite of avoiding bad things, but also providing good things and providing delight. So this is where design and architecture make this not just engineering, it's providing spaces that people will enjoy, that are comfortable, that are delightful, visually stimulating. All of those things go into wellness. And then prevents environmental harm. So this is where we start talking about the concept that Patty was mentioning, community health versus individual health versus building health. So preventing environmental harm is where the wellness starts to go beyond the building and then talks about how the building is contributing to the wellness of the local community, the global community. This is where things like energy use and carbon offset and those kinds of things that, and you know, ecology and all of the things that contribute to our total global health come into play. So it's at all scales, but this is where I am now. This is what healthy building / just straight up building means to me. How I got here is not very straightforward. And that's another way of looking at that. So I went to architecture school. I threw some years on there. They're in the middle. I didn't put ranges to kind of keep it a little loose so you couldn't tell how old I am. But I went to undergraduate school at Northeastern University, which is a fairly practical program, but does take a kind of human-centered approach to design. So what I mean by that is a lot of functional studio projects. Form is obviously important, but it's kind of a derivative of the function of the building and how people are going to use the space. And that was how I learned architecture at an undergraduate level. And that kind of all culminated in my, what you guys would be your comprehensive studio project here, where we start to integrate environmental building systems a little bit, you know, full design scope on the project. And this was the end of a 5-year program where I also had 3 6-month internships. So it was 5 years, but it was still just a Bachelor of Science. So I would need an additional year or a couple years of master's degree to get a professional degree. And I was going to go to Northeastern because they offer a 1-year program if you went there for undergrad. It seemed like the smart option, and then some stuff happened, and I decided not to do that. And so I took a step back, kind of realized that taking the easiest, fastest path was maybe not the best path for me, and I ended up working a little bit in Boston. And this was kind of where I learned what not to do for myself. I'm going to preface that very clearly. Learned what not to do, part 1, for myself. So I worked at a couple different places during school and after school where I worked on some really cool projects. You can see some really great forms there that we were generating. worked a lot of hours, and gained a lot of very useful experience, but realized very quickly that this architecture that was kind of devoid of the human experience and wasn't really considering how humans were going to use the space much, and was much more focused on the overall form of the project, wasn't what I wanted to do. And I remembered back to my time at Northeastern, and the class that kind of resonated with me most was environmental building systems, and I realized I don't really know a lot about that, but that kind of seems like what I want to do. And at the time, there were very few programs in the US, if any, that offered a master's degree in it. And so I ended up meeting with someone who went to the Architectural Association in London, who was from a different program there, and actually convinced me to not do the sustainable design program there. I did go to the AA for graduate school. I applied to the DRL program, which was kind of the program that feeds right into Zaha Hadid's office, to give you an idea of the type of work design we were studying there. I lasted less than a full semester. I hated what we were doing. I did not see the point. This was like not even devoid of human experience, but even devoid of architectural anything. It was just form making. Scale was not an issue. It was really just about processes and form. And I'm not saying that's not valuable, but at the time, it did not resonate with me at all. And I made a very terrifying decision. I had spent a lot of money to go to this program, and it just felt so wrong that I pulled out. And at the AA, you can't just transfer. You have to wait an entire year because the curriculum is set up in such a way that it is just what it is. So I took a year of living in London, not going to school, working temp jobs to wait so that I could finally land where I wanted to be. So this is where I started to learn how to promote occupant well-being for real, I say. So it was a very technical course. I learned a lot of the technical skills I have now around energy modeling, daylight analysis, thermal performance of envelopes, all of that kind of great stuff. And then I did the MArch, which resulted in a kind of final, they call it a dissertation there. It is a thesis, graduate thesis, which I focused on healthcare, because it seemed like focusing on something more than just how to reduce energy use in buildings, how to promote, how to connect that with something that pertains directly to occupant experience resonated most with me. And I went through a personal experience there where I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and British hospitals of a certain era are the most depressing places you will ever be, and sitting there kind of going through a very stressful situation, with no view to the outside, long corridors where I had no idea where I was going, just kind of made me feel even worse. And so I realized, hey, this is a really great problem that could have a really big impact. So I tied the high energy use of hospitals with the really poor architectural quality, and realized that through some smart design decisions, you could actually address both problems. And that was kind of the big moment for me. So this is just, I designed a kind of natural ventilation air filtering stack to feed into the non-critical patient rooms. So the majority of energy in hospitals is heating, air conditioning, and ventilation rates. And a lot of it is because they treat the entire hospital to a very high level. And yes, operating rooms and critical areas have to be treated to that way, but it's actually better for patient rooms. There's a lot of research that shows patient rooms that have view to the outside, daylight, view of nature, and natural ventilation actually heal faster and recover faster. And so this was a way to achieve that. Obviously very academic. I know that healthcare architect over here is identifying all of the practical issues that would not ever allow this to happen, but in terms of an academic exercise, it was a lot of fun. So that, eventually I moved back to San Francisco, or not back to, I moved to San Francisco from London, which was an interesting transition to go from, California is kind of the leader of sustainability in the United States for many reasons, but coming from Europe, we're very far behind in some ways. And so that transition was very interesting. Certain things I took as just kind of common practice, I realized were not common practice here. I was lucky enough to land at a great firm called EHDD. I specifically sought out architecture firms that focused on sustainable design, and they have a lot of great sustainable projects, some net zero energy projects, but I very quickly learned that they actually didn't have in-house sustainability consulting, I'll call it, or analysis, or, you know, they kind of intuitively knew what to do, and they worked with really good engineers, but there was a missed opportunity for kind of refining the design through analysis. And so I pretty much built a practice there internally, myself only. I was the only consultant in this group, but I forced the project managers to hire me internally to help their projects with environmental analysis. And so I think the lesson there is, if you go somewhere and you see something that's missing or an opportunity to improve, don't be shy. Like, I was out of grad school, you know, and I had some experience, but when I look back at it, I was like, wow, that was kind of bold. I was like, you know, mid-20s person coming into a firm saying, hey, you're missing this, let's do this. And it depends on the culture of the firm. This firm was very receptive to it, and it took some time, but we got there, and it was a really great experience. That being said, I had always wanted to work for Atelier 10 since I was in London. They're based in London. When I graduated from my master's degree, that was where I wanted to work. They weren't hiring. Moved to San Francisco. They weren't hiring here. And then eventually, after working at EHD for 4 years, they reached out to me, and that's where I now am for the past 2 years. So now I'm getting to do all of it together. It's a lot of fun, much like Lynn was saying, you know, I get to work with a lot of different architects. I work on projects of all scales, from, you know, 800-acre master plans down to single-family homes and everything in between. We focus mostly on the west half of the United States, because we have a New York office which covers the east half. But lots of California work, Arizona, some work in ASU, and we do a lot of different things. So one example that I think I really like, this is not my project, but it's a great example of how we can help contribute to design. So this is the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital that's being built in New York. And it's the kind of center building there in white. And the entire kind of facade approach is informed by solar needs and the impact of, excuse me, the buildings surrounding it. So you can kind of see the top shows. So they had a very uniform approach to the facade design and the windows. We did a solar insolation analysis, so we're mapping how much sun is falling on each of the facades over the course of the year, and you can kind of see the color striations of how it's different. And then we use that to show where we need more shading, where we need less shading, and we kind of tailored the size and the design of the shading based on that. And so you end up with this really dynamic facade that's not just beautiful and looks good, it's actually performing a very important function. So that's really where we try to thrive and try to engage with architects and kind of provide value, is enhancing their design direction with performance that backs it up. And I think the last thing I'll say is the more that I learn, the more that I realize I don't know. So it's really easy, and I have been guilty of this, to come out of architecture school or graduate school ready to take on the world, thinking you know everything, and I kind of didn't know how much I didn't know until I knew more. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So I think that's just a good lesson and reminder. Ask questions, you know, admit what you don't know. That's fine. No one knows everything. And yeah, just continue to learn. I think echoing what you said is I learn every single day, sometimes more than I want, but it's great. Thank you.
I'm going to turn our focus to some student questions. As Jen said, these are coming from students in the professional practice course, mostly. And I think I want to start because each of you has shown us a project or projects that are not on the West Coast. And so there is a presumption that the West Coast is at the forefront of sustainable design. I'd like you to tell us if you think that's true. If that's so, why do you think that's the case? And are other parts of the country catching up? And this not for anybody in particular, but whoever would like to.
Okay. Is it on? Is it on? Okay. Great question. And I think that you mentioned Europe being leaders, and they have been in sustainable design, especially when it comes to daylight and how close to how accessible daylight is to humans, and the requirements that are there have been there for a long time, and certainly better than here. However, California, and I would say Northern California, and of course I have a bias. This is where I've developed my career and practice and went to school. But we are a leader in sustainable design, and it's for a couple reasons. Some of those reasons stem from the policy that's been developed here in the city, especially in San Francisco, that mandates green building. So we are really interested in market transformation and how we as developers and the market transforms the way we build, but we are helped greatly by the requirements in the city. So the city and county of San Francisco have a requirement that any project built in San Francisco, I'm oversimplifying, but basically any project built in San Francisco, if your residential has to be at least LEED Silver, and if your commercial has to be at least LEED Gold. LEED is not the end-all. LEED is an imperfect system, but what it has done is set rigor to sustainability in our community and requires developers who never would have looked at sustainable design and architecture and operations of a project without that. So we're very lucky that the city and county of San Francisco has a green building ordinance that has really helped transform the building in this city. The other big policy shift that occurred was the stormwater collection of reuse for our city, or rainwater reuse and gray water mandate. And in fact, there's even a new requirement now that all gray water systems the water has to be treated to black water standards, which is a brand new requirement that's affecting a lot of projects. So it's pretty interesting. So policy cannot be underestimated in the transformation of a community to be more sustainable. So between the expertise that's here and the schools that are here and the expertise and the commitment of our own values and passion toward a more green place to live, we are really leaders in this area. Now, it doesn't mean that other parts of the country aren't doing really well. New York has, and oh, by the way, I should have said the first thing was we have had probably one of the best energy codes in the country with what's called Title 24. So for the last 30 years, we have had very good requirements, and they keep getting better about how energy efficient our buildings should be. So it really started there. Other places like Washington and Oregon, all up and down the West Coast, certainly New York and on the East Coast, and even in the middle parts of the country. But there are now LEED buildings and also living building projects all over the world. China, India, Brazil, Mexico. I mean, that's the thing that LEED has done, is it has transformed not just the United States in the way we build, but also internationally. So again, that was not a mandated code in most places. It is in San Francisco, but not in most places. But it provides a rigor and a framework by which design and construction teams can build their buildings.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think another group that implemented LEED was the GSA, the General Services Administration, which is basically the development arm of our government. And so that was a way to bring LEED and these kinds of sustainable design ideas to areas of the country that may not have seen it otherwise, but they get a new federal building of some kind, and it has to meet these requirements. And
that's a great point.
That was very instrumental. I'm going to let you talk about Arizona, because that was one of my examples, but I'll let you talk about that.
Well,
but
I'm glad you mentioned Title 24, because that's come up multiple times in our work at the university, is what does Title 24 say? So as far as my experience is, yes, we are looking to California as a leader.
There's not a companion or parallel energy code in Arizona at this point in time? No. Or not as rigorous?
No,
or not at all?
Not at all. we haven't.
It's sort of
the Wild West.
So foreign to us here. after
Yeah,
30
it's
years,
still,
hotel 24.
it depends on the individual jurisdiction. And so the university, we haven't even adopted a code, but we do have a set of sustainable design guidelines, and we have project guidelines that we are starting to include those sustainable design guidelines within, embedding that in contractual requirements for projects.
Here in the Bay Area, outside of San Francisco, have you seen other municipalities or agencies, that have purview over development stepping up in that same way, or is it still a struggle?
Yeah, they kind of all do the same thing. What is San Francisco doing? To a certain extent. But yes, we have seen that some of the municipalities in the peninsula, especially the ones that are getting very, very large tech projects, are kind of determining how best to make sure those very, very large projects are not detrimental to the community. And so they are looking to San Francisco to set an example to how to go beyond the code minimum.
Well, and what I'd like to add, which I can't believe I forgot to say, was that California was the first state to create a mandated statewide code minimum for green building, which is called Cal Green. So every project in California, again, an oversimplification, but every project in California has to meet minimum green building standards. And so every jurisdiction, whatever city you're in, there are mandatory measures, required measures from Cal Green. So that's great. Many of them were taken from LEED, which again was not a mandated code, but a set of basically a standard, a voluntary standard. And then Cal Green came in, and so it has helped really drive green building throughout all these different jurisdictions. Now, some municipalities choose to even go greener, and there are actually some ways to do that through Cal Green. They're called tiers, and you can choose a tier 1 or tier 2, to incorporate even more green measures. So there are some cities like Marin County and others that have taken these on to be even greener. So we're very lucky that we start with basically our code minimum is giving you a pretty decent green building. So if you don't do these things, such as low emitting materials, low toxic materials, certain ventilation rates, certain waste reduction rates, if you don't do those, you're breaking the law, basically. So the challenge has been, though, once that code became mandated, or it became code, was how do you get jurisdictions to get the building inspectors and to get the building departments to verify the compliance. And I think that's where the challenge has been in the last 10 years, as the code came in about 2010, so not quite 10 years. How do you get the cities to educate their internal staff to actually, when they review these projects, to understand how to meet this minimum Cal Green code? So we're very lucky to be green building consultants and to work in this area because we're starting with a good baseline.
I'm going to follow up with, because it's still a relatively new field, we've all talked about in the bigger scheme of things, and put yourself again outside of California or outside of the Bay Area where these things in many places are mandated or becoming more part of our sort of normal design process, right? We don't think about it as much as we used to have to. Outside of this area, how do you help educate clients about the importance of this when it's not mandated? Because the mandate, as you said, makes it somewhat easier. We just have to do that.
It was really hard, honestly, but it makes it easier.
Yeah. Do you have strategies, anybody have strategies for how to bring clients then around to understanding the value?
So you mentioned that the tech companies are all, Google, Facebook, they're all doing green now. Why do you think they're doing that? Anybody have an idea why these companies, that when it's not mandated, it's a choice from the company? What are some reasons why firms do this, big companies do this? A good example, you want to be a leader in it. What are some other good reasons? Yeah. They're innovators. They set the bar. They want to demonstrate how they're innovators. And guess what? Whether it's a tech company or a university, they're building green buildings to recruit talent, whether it's employees or whether it's students. So it's wonderful to see what Arizona is doing, and there are other universities doing other things. they're doing it partially because they want to recruit faculty and staff, and they want to recruit students to go to those schools. So it's for innovation, it's for market transformation, it's because it's the right thing to do. There's a variety of reasons why. So it's not easy, but I'll let others respond to maybe some processes. But the good news is there are people doing it not just for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is they're doing it because it's the right thing, but it's actually also the financially smart thing to do, which is another way that we help show the value. So there is, there's hard costs, soft costs savings. So we do life cycle cost assessment. So yes, you might be spending more money up front on something, but when you look at it over the cost of the entire building, it actually saves you money. So this is especially powerful when you're pitching to someone who's going to be operating the building. If it's a developer, marketability is a very important piece of that. Durability is an important piece of that. And then the other piece, especially if it is an occupier of the project, I'm thinking of office buildings mostly, but the kind of human benefit. So we're coming back to wellness, but the human factor and the cost is, there is research that backs all of this up that, healthy buildings, and we kind of know now that healthy buildings typically are also lower energy buildings, but healthy buildings result in more productive staff, which, when you look at where companies invest their money, very, very small percentage of it is actually in the physical space. The majority of it is in the people that work there. And so if you make the space support the people who work there by making healthy and productive environments, that's actually saving them money and in the long run. So that's a pretty big strategy for us as well.
And related to that, because you and I talked about this before, when you have a project that has every project has a budget, but let's say it has a challenging budget or a tight budget, and when you get to that point in the process where you're trying to find ways to reduce costs overall, a lot of times those elements that a client who isn't educated thinks is an extra will be what we call value engineered, right, VE'd out. And so the strategy of showing that the cost benefit analysis, the health benefit to workers and so on and so forth seems like a good strategy to avoid that being on the chopping block during VE. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that and sort of saved something from being eliminated for those kinds of reasons. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. Yes, at the university, that's definitely because we are the owner. We own our building. So that's the case internally that we make to our leadership. But just to backtrack into that last question as well, our students are driving this. Our students are asking for this. In fact, when we worked on the net zero energy building, they said, well, of course it's going to be sustainable. I mean, that was just baseline. That was a given. It wasn't as if this was anything out of the ordinary. So I think when the students start to say, this is what we want, and we want the students, I think it becomes this really nice cycle. To answer your question, did I lose track?
Something that you were able to save that maybe was a question about being taken out for budget reasons, but there was an explanation to
a financial savings.
Yeah, or other reasons to.
Well, I think it's actually more to the soft side of things, of that it does help the university promote itself in a better way to walk its talk. So that's what we look from the owner's side. We need to walk our talk.
Mm-hmm. We worked on a multifamily affordable housing project in San Jose. We have a client that we've done, I think, 8 buildings that have been either LEED Gold or LEED Platinum for affordable housing. They're a leader in this kind of development. And we were putting a green roof on the building, and we were able to demonstrate that the green roof was able to capture, I don't remember how much stormwater, and filter it rather than it go into the storm sewer system. This was maybe 10 years ago. And what it resulted in, a reduced cost in putting in a large concrete pipe to collect that water and send it into the, basically, waste into the storm sewer system. So by demonstrating that we were collecting the water rather than it needing to go into this big system, we saved the developer about $240,000. So while the green roof cost some money that maybe wasn't in their original budget, we now eliminated this big piping that needed to be done, and it more than paid for, the green roof more than paid for the offset cost as a result of not putting in this big piping. So I hadn't thought of that story in a long time, but it's a really good story, actually.
Yeah, and kind of similar vein was a project, a net zero energy project, where the envelope cost was higher than what a typical envelope would cost. But basically, the strategy is invest in the architecture so that you can spend less money on mechanical systems. So by investing in this envelope, it actually decreased the required size of the mechanical unit to such an extent that they actually saved money. So yes, they spent more money on the envelope, but they spent less money on the system, and they saved money all in all. And so those are the kinds of owners and contractors just look at it line by line a lot of times, and they don't necessarily look at the bigger picture. And so as an architect, that is actually, or a green consultant, that is actually a big part of what you're there to do. I talk about my role as a communicator, getting the architect and the engineer speaking the same language. That's one of the tools, one of the kind of things that helps you to get the project to be better is making those connections.
That's integrative design.
Exactly.
That's really that is fundamental to getting green buildings. It has to be an integrative design process, which means that you have the entire project team, contractor, you can have operations people, all these people involved in the project having conversations very early in the project. It's not the architect doing their work and passing their drawings to the mechanical engineer and having a meeting monthly. This is a very intensive process up front that continues throughout the life of the project, where there's a lot more collaboration and communication going on. And I really appreciate your point about communication and collaboration, because it is fundamental in your work. If you go into the architecture and engineering industry, that's what we do. We are communicators and collaborators between different disciplines.
So how early in the projects that you've worked on do you have what I'll call a sustainability charrette?
So when I had my own firm, we did the first, I think, 5 buildings plus the central plant at Merced, UC Merced, and we were part of the process to pick the site. We were on the master planning team to pick the site.
So very early.
Very early. It can never be too early.
Right.
That's the rule. Never too early to bring in sustainable design considerations.
Exactly. I want to follow up on that. So utilizing a sustainable design philosophy encourages decisions at every phase, every stage and every phase of design. So if you're thinking about students who are starting a design studio, whatever level that studio is, a beginning level or intermediate or advanced studio, what are the top 3 things you would tell them to do first, early on, as they begin that design process? I know there could be like 20, but I'm just keeping...
We each get 3, right? So
yeah,
that could be
there
9.
you go.
Okay.
We'll have 9.
Well, I'll start because I do this with 450, so I guess I have an advantage in that I do this every semester. But I kind of remind them to look at who's using the project. So in that case, it's multiple buildings, but who's using the buildings or the programs, what program is there, who's using it, when are they using it, as a kind of fundamental starting point. Look at the climate as the second as the kind of second piece. Always look at the climate, and then look at the site conditions and the context. So those are kind of 3 fundamental pieces of information that, from my point of view, go in with all of the other information that you get at the beginning of a design project in school.
I would approach it in terms of picking up on the climate piece, looking at the orientation. It's really critical that you get the building facing the right direction, and that you look at this window to wall ratio and the shading. And it seems like a very simple aspect, but look at how many buildings do not have shading on all of the windows on a facade. So if one of the windows or 2 or 6 need shading on that facade, why are the rest of them not shaded? So that was a beautiful example of looking at the analysis that Amy did on the building, and the building should be responding to its site and to its climate. And so those should be the first big steps you take, are what are those elements that are going to help you respond appropriately to the site and the climate: windows, orientation, and shading of the facade.
Well, ditto, 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 ditto. And then I would say, I know this sounds a little kind of off or contradictory, but do you need to build a new building? Do we really need the building? We have a lot of buildings. can we reuse buildings? Can we reuse existing infrastructure? Do we need to build somewhere that you need to bring in all this infrastructure for miles to bring in the water and the energy and all that? Building buildings is complicated. So I guess I would ask that question. Do you need the building? If the answer is yes, can you reuse existing buildings? And can you build it in a place that you don't have to use, or that you're using existing infrastructure? Whether that's transportation, whether that's communication, whether that's energy. That's the greenest building is one. We have a palette of existing buildings, especially in urban environments, where there's so much work that could be done. That's the greenest building. Well, no building is a greenest building, but that's not our business. So then the next thing you should look at is looking at existing buildings and how do you take advantage of existing infrastructure.
Well, that's actually the answer to one of the questions the students had, which was, I'll just tell you what the question was, how does rehabbing or renovating existing buildings fit into the picture of sustainability, and how do we promote this as a way of improving the use of resources?
Yes. Well, the number one in that category is embodied energy. The minute you demolish something, all of a sudden you've lost all the energy, both in the extraction, manufacturing, transport of those materials. They have a life, and you've ended their life. Now you have to bring all those processes to bear on new construction. So just an example, on the net zero energy building, part of the zero waste piece of that was there was an existing building on the site, and 99+% of that building was diverted from the landfill before we started the new building. So if you do need to eliminate an existing building, take one down, look at where that waste is going to go and reuse it or divert it in some way. Then in addition, using existing buildings also gives you a lot of opportunities, because often those buildings either are so bad, they maybe don't have any windows, don't have any character, that you can do something really special with them. So it's often those kind of what's happening now with shopping malls. And in fact, one of the projects at ASU was an old VA medical center, which nobody even wanted to go in. It was so terrible to be in there. And the architect brought in daylight from above, opened the corridors out to the rooms beyond, and all of a sudden it became this light-filled little jewel box, we referred to it. So these existing buildings are actually really great design opportunities. And often the worse they are, the more you can do with them. So that, from a designer's standpoint, it couldn't be much better.
That's great. Yeah. Because this field and designing with sustainable strategies is evolving, always new information is, at our fingertips. What do each of you do to stay current? What resources might you point students to for them to kind of push that themselves?
Well, there's a lot of publications out there, and good publications. There's some like Green Building and Design, GB&D, which tends to go a little glossy, case studies, worth getting. And then there's publications like Building Green. Is that? Yeah, Building Green, which is out of Vermont. It's a very well researched, some of the best research done. You can get it online, and they look at everything from gray water systems to healthy materials. They've been around 15, 20 years, very committed to, they don't take advertising, very committed to making sure that their information is very robust. I think those are some very good tools. And then we have some great resources in our community. We have the PG&E Energy Center, which is very close to here. They have free classes on daylighting, on HVAC systems. Students get discounts. I mean, they really are a resource for professionals in this community. I would highly encourage that. There's a very good chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council that offers lectures and also classes and that sort of thing, and great networking. They have a group called Emerging Green Builders. I think they just changed the name, but it's young people, students, and young people in the industry. You can network. I highly encourage that. So we have great resources.
Yeah, and I mean, students also get really good discounts on conferences, so traveling, may or may not be easy. We are in one of the biggest cities, so a lot of times they do come here. There's the big ones, such as Green Build, which is kind of the biggest industry one. That's every single year. Students, like I said, you get really discounted prices. And I think most of them you can actually go for free if you volunteer for a certain number of hours.
This year it's in Chicago in November.
Exactly, yep. And the Living Futures one is really good. That's in the Pacific Northwest almost always, so it's really easy to get there, and it's a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable. There are other ones that are a little bit more specific, so like Diva Day, which is starting to talk about, you know, a specific type of software, which is very prevalent in daylight analysis, and so it's super nerds just talking about how they do daylight analysis, which is really interesting and very focused. And a lot of times there are publications that come out of these, so even if you can't make it to the conference, looking for publications that come out of it is really helpful. And then there's a lot of online resources, so a lot of the tools and software that people are using to do analysis are open source, so and have tutorials and whatnot online on how to do it. And so, I mean, teaching yourself is a really good way to learn some of the more technical tools as well.
I also just remembered that there's a conference coming up called Greener Builder, which is put on by the Northern California chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council, and it's coming up, I think it's June. It's sometime coming up in the next 3 to 4 months. That's a local one-day green building conference. And then the other one is AIA San Francisco has the next conference, which is coming up, which is, I think it's June 10th and 11th, and they have a green track, whether it's technology, design, or business, and so worth getting the student rate and going to that as well.
And I would recommend taking a look at the journals in your library. You'd be surprised, even the ASHRAE Journal, American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Engineers, that will have articles that are very appropriate for architects. And so they're short, they're easy to dive into. You can always learn more, but they at least give you a nice synopsis of what's going on. So in all these areas of sustainability, there are journals, so that's keeping you the most current because they're vetted. Also, one I would recommend is Drawdown by Paul Hawken, and it's really looking at sustainability broadly from a carbon perspective. How do we get to zero carbon as our metric? And ultimately, all of these metrics are working toward that, but he has this book is very comprehensive, and I think it will spur your design thinking because it's very broad. It's looking more at, strategies, broad strategies. And then you may or may not ask this, but I'm going to go ahead and say the book I'm reading right now, which I highly recommend, that I stumbled on because I was at the library looking for something else. So I was getting interested in systems theory and how that applies to architecture. And so I was at the library, and you know how you go to the library and you look at the books around that book, right? So I saw something called pattern theory, and brought back to mind Christopher Alexander and the pattern language. So I took that book. It turned out to be a German author who had written a synopsis of Christopher Alexander's philosophy on pattern theory, which led me to now reading The Nature of Order, which is a 4-volume set that Christopher Alexander has written about basically the nature of order, about life and how do you create spaces that are life. So it kind of ties back into our well-being discussion. So just be open to what you find as you're looking for and researching in these areas. You'll often stumble on to other things that will lead you to the next thing. And so it's something just to keep in mind as you're teaching yourself, as you're learning more.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else reading anything interesting at the moment?
American Wolf. It has to do with sustainability and ecological well-being, because it's about the reintroduction of the wolves to Wyoming. And I'm reading it because I got to see them in person recently, so that was very cool.
Yeah, good.
And then I just finished the Book of Joy, which is an interview between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And it's a week that they spent together, and it's definitely, I listened to it on Audible. It was a wonderful listen.
Mm-hmm. And I told you guys earlier, it's probably because I've been at the building department too much, but I picked up a book I've read several times before, which is Code of the Samurai, as I'm trying to keep my ethics and my standards very high. I do want to turn questions over to the audience. We have more, but I do want to make sure that students have the opportunity, or faculty in the audience that have questions. So, Jen, do you have microphones to share out there?
Great.
Stand back, and since our online students have already started asking questions, I'm going to let them be first in line. Just to remind the panelists, I'm right in front of the camera here. Just to remind the panelists, we have, how many students are online watching, Nathan? 25 students are online watching this. 25 participants, could be faculty or students. So I'm going to get myself to a place where I can see this question. Okay, so Cody Schokenmeyer, who is in South Dakota, is asking, what if the Board of Regents for a university project opposes the additional costs for these sustainable strategies, even though the students want it? How do you overcome conflicts? I think it might be pointed at Patricia.
That's just fine. Actually, the students paid for the student pavilion.
Wow.
They voted a fee on themselves that created a fund for student support facilities. So it's helping to pay for recreation facilities, student centers, and other similar. So they had a strong voice in that case. As far as other projects, they make themselves heard. I mean, that's often what happens is those decisions that go to the Board of Regents happen before that the Board of Regents hears it. So getting the ear of your department head and then getting the ear of leadership at the university who are setting those budgets and making those decisions, I think that's the best strategy, is before it gets to the Board of Regents, make their voices heard.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a university project where we were with the university side, and they were kind of being like, we were talking about a specific strategy, and someone was talking about getting rid of it, and someone else was like, no, we can't get rid of that. So-and-so has been harassing me every single day about this specific requirement, and it was a freshman who had made it their life work to harass this individual that they had access to at the university side to make sure that this thing happened. And so the students have power, absolutely, yeah.
So Cody asked another question about, and I'm not, you guys started to answer this question when you were talking about, the top 3 things, but he asked whether there's a strategy that's most important to any one of you. And I'm going to start with asking you to think about the context that you're designing for. So maybe that helps talk about important strategies.
So it's raining, which is fantastic. But what we really need is, and we've been pretty good the last few months, but snow in the mountains, because that's where we get our water source from. For me, one of my kind of pet things is, why are we using potable water to flush our toilets? It makes no sense. It's ridiculous. And that's the way the code was written. We flush toilets with potable water. So my thing right now, my real commitment is looking at how to reduce potable water use of buildings. And I'm thankful for the requirements here in the city and county of San Francisco. Both with Atelier 10 and my firm, Simon Associates, we were part of development of the guidelines and the policy here in San Francisco as a result of working on Transbay Transit Center and also on 525 Golden Gate that I think some of you may have seen yesterday. We were the sustainability consultants on that project, and we've been working with Atelier 10 on Transbay Transit Center. And the fight never ends. You have to continue pushing your values and your commitment, because somebody somewhere will think it's not a good idea. So at this point, for me, it's about water. And again, we've had a good year this year, pretty good year, but we've been in, it depends who you ask, 4 to 8 years of drought in California. And I'm going to be speaking on, what do I call it? It's water balance in a changing climate. I'll be moderating a panel at the next conference. And we have 3 speakers, and I'm going to be opening with looking at what is the water situation in California. And despite the rain we've had this year, we are still in drought, and there are some municipalities, some areas of California that are in serious drought. So just because we have some rain doesn't mean we should stop collecting water and reusing it. So I think that's for me, that's a passion and an interest.
I would say the building envelope. And that comes from having worked in extreme climates. So coming from Minnesota, University of Minnesota, was where I received my undergraduate degree. You design to retain that heat and keep out the cold. That's your barrier. That's your second skin, your third skin. Your clothing being your second skin. Same is true of the desert. So when we're designing in the desert, we need to get the envelope right. We need to make sure that that barrier, that interface between the comfort of the interior environment, where it meets our extreme desert temperatures. And that's why I said windows and shading, particularly for the desert climate. The more we can keep the sun off, the better off we are in terms of reducing our load in that building.
So yeah, those were my two, but I'm going to be forced to keep going, and I'm going to go with renewable energy. I know that there's, our energy crisis is not going to be solved solely at the building scale, and we do need kind of large scale, utility scale renewable energy solutions, but those are also relatively slow moving in certain parts of the country, and there is a lot of opportunity for renewable energy at the building scale. And the only way to get to true carbon neutrality is by including renewable energy sources. And I think we're kind of having a self-reflection of this in our own practice, because we do push the architecture as far as we possibly can, and that's what our primary goal is, and I think that's very important. But we are kind of realizing that maybe we don't push renewable energy as much as we should as a viable strategy that, especially in California, does have a pretty fast payback in terms of a cost and investment. So, yeah.
All right, so any more questions from online, Nathan? One more, hold on. From Karen. This is Karen Song, who's one of our faculty members. Do you know of architects who are working on the policy side, making policy?
Yes, I do. City of Scottsdale has an architect, FAIA. Anthony Floyd is his name, and he's devoted his career and serves to working on the code side and serves on the International Building Code Council to embed energy, anything, any sustainability component. So he makes that in addition to his full-time job. He also works on code changes.
Yeah, I mean, mine was going to be in honor of the late Bill Worthen, who was an architect, also FAIA, wonderful human, and spent a lot of time also developing policy for San Francisco and California and others. So.
And then there's a gentleman by the name of Clark Brockman with Sarah Architects. He's incredible, and he has been pushing sustainable policy, especially on the water side, for many years, and really attribute some real movement on the policy side to him. So,
and where's his position in which he can do that on the policy side, out of curiosity?
You know, a lot of this is volunteer.
Yep.
It's not part of your paid job.
Yep.
And so many of us that have been involved over the years in making change to code or policy, it's our side gig, you know, and I think that it's a passion you have, and you get involved in these initiatives, whether you're, many of us have been on committees for AIA or U.S. Green Building Council to help make change, and so I think it comes from within, so most of it's not paid work, it's just part of your passion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to add to that, sometimes you get lucky enough to have a project to help you do that. And so, again, I think as your role as the architect, we have a project that wants to do water reuses in a location that the health code currently doesn't really allow it. But the design team really wants to go for it. And so does the, part of the client group. And so we are in a position to work with the architect to meet with the local health regulator and push them to change their policy to basically modernize and join the century. And so in some cases you do have the opportunity on the project, but as the architect you're the advocate for it. And just because the first time you bring it up they say, oh no, that's forbidden by policy, look into it a little bit more and see if you can actually be the one to change that policy, because that's how policy changes.
You say thank you, and who's your boss? And go up a notch.
Any questions here?
Hello. First of all, thank you for your time today. And I think the well-being is most common topic of the day. So, which means there's tons of researches outside, and we can access to those researches with a couple of clicks. And my question is, what is your primary principle when you apply or translate those researches to architecture design?
The people. So for me, it always comes back to who is using the space, how are they using it, and what do they need out of it, because it's going to be different. The principles are going to be the same, daylight, air quality, that kind of stuff, but what that means for your specific project is going to be different depending on the people, the climate, and kind of the things we talked about and what you start to look at in a design project.
And I would add that one of the things I try to do is you're not going to get every sustainable strategy on every project. So really understanding your client and what's going to resonate with them. So we sometimes have to make some compromises, but I also know that I try and push when I can and know that I have to sometimes agree when I don't want to. And so understanding, so for instance, certified wood, FSC certified wood, Forest Stewardship Council, which is a requirement. If you're going to get the wood credit in LEED, it has to be FSC certified. And when I have a client that is going to put a lot of wood in their project, and I think it's going to could impact the industry, then I'm going to push that particular sustainability area. Or if I'm working on a school project, I'm going to really push indoor air quality, because you have kids that are rolling around on the floor and have not as mature and advanced immune systems. So I try to be strategic, I guess that's the best word I can think of, strategic about what am I going to push to make that I feel I can make the biggest difference.
And I think as designers, it's also important to put yourself put yourself in your occupant's place. Really think about see through their eyes, think about what their experience of that place is going to be. And my example in that case is there's a movement, especially in desert architecture, to just screen the facades. We'll just keep all of the sun off, and we'll just make either a perforated or a louvered panel. Go in and get inside a building and look out through that somehow. Either create it in SketchUp or go find a building where that's happening and see if you think that's acceptable. Because oftentimes you're blocking view. So you're removing a component of well-being to serve another function. So make sure your functions aren't competing against each other, so that you ultimately are serving your client's well-being by getting in their shoes as much as you can, getting into their perspective of how they're going to experience your design.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It was great content, and I'm really happy that you're all women here. So, yeah, I'm very pleased. So my question would be, so you all talked about LEED, Living Building Challenge, and you all had a vision about what the future is going to be, which is today. So do you see a pattern of how the future of architecture and sustainability is going to be, so we can be well prepared as students who are entering the field? So how do you see the future of sustainability and architecture in general?
Thank you for the question. I think it's less about a certification and a certification system, and it's more about the actual concepts and strategies and how to solve the issues. So for me, what I would rather see than WELL and GPR and LEED, I'd rather see a library of sustainable strategies, and that you look at your project, you look at the users, the occupants, the location, the climate, and say, this is what's important. This is the greatest impact. Very similar to what I said before. So that what that really translates to is diversify your expertise. That's my opinion. It's my bias. I think it's, then you can emphasize one if you're really interested in energy modeling or daylight modeling, that's great. but have an understanding of all the sustainability issues, which is complicated because that's the thing about being in sustainability. It addresses landscape issues and architectural issues and operational issues. It's not singular. It's very multifaceted. So having a general base understanding of different sustainability concepts and how they can be applied is very useful. And then if you're interested in kind of focusing on one area, that's fine. But I think it's important to be dynamic, flexible, and resilient in your career, and that's one way to do that.
I would say where I would hope it would be moving, and I do believe it is, especially with Living Building Challenge, is toward as close to self-sustaining as possible. So how do we start from that as the goal? Doesn't mean we'll get there, but what would you need to do to make your project self-sustaining? Now that could be self-sustaining within your community, it could be on the site, which is going to be harder, but what do you need to do to get to, and this is the ultimate goal, is carbon neutral? How do you build a project that doesn't negatively impact yourself as the occupant, your community, or the larger environment?
Yeah, and I think we are in a bubble here, so we kind of alluded to that with our first question, but California sustainability is kind of discussed on every project because it has to be. That being said, I think it's pretty quickly becoming a mandatory thing to be discussed everywhere. The level to which they're able to implement it varies, but I think the more time goes on and the more extreme our climate gets and the more evident the importance of it becomes and the kind of more impossible it is to deny, I think it's going to just become more mainstream and part of design. Like there are big design shops that kind of think of sustainability as an afterthought still, and I think that's going to change.
We have a question from one of our online students, online participants, who is watching from Barbados. And his question is, which sustainable solutions would you recommend to people building primarily with concrete, cinder blocks, and rebar, as in the Caribbean?
I'll try and tackle that briefly. I would say, because I work for a structural engineering firm, I would say the embodied carbon, which is what you were talking about. So we at Thornton Tomasetti, and we're a big outfit. Every project we do, we try to understand the embodied carbon of the structure, which is big, whether it's steel or concrete. And so the idea is to learn from that, what implications is our structure having, and then not necessarily reducing it on that project because they're being designed, but on future projects to understand how to reduce, look at embodied carbon and reducing our carbon footprint. So I think that one thing, building with concrete is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But how do you minimize size, I guess, is what I would say, is how do you think about the building and looking at the interrelationships in the integrative design process so that you're not oversizing systems, you're not oversizing your beams, that you're really minimizing material use, because that will impact size of the project, how much energy you use, how much water you use.
And since you have concrete, use that mass appropriately. So make sure it's shaded from the hot sun, and you open the building at night to cool it off. So look for ways to naturally ventilate and then also keep the mass from overheating. So use that to your advantage.
Any other questions from this audience? Anyone?
So given the, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how all the rhetoric coming out of Washington or the White House right now, have you seen any negative or real impact towards this movement, towards the sustainability movement?
I've seen positive impact. If anything, it has spurred a lot of us to a little bit more action. So California especially is kind of leading the charge, but mayors of a lot of different cities, major cities in the United States, have banded together to basically say, hey, we're all going to agree to the Paris climate deal anyway. And so it's basically just making a lot of local regulators and mayors and institutions kind of more responsible for themselves, kind of relying less on federal mandates and just kind of making it happen themselves. So so far, I think from energy and kind of carbon and that kind of standpoint, we've seen generally no negative impact, and if anything, positive impact in terms of action.
I love your positive approach. Thank you. I mean,
Really
honestly, thank you.
Really
It's really wonderful. A little bit of contrary, which is I don't think we've seen the result of the dismantling of the EPA and our air quality and water standards. So we don't really know yet what that impact's going to be. The hope is that there's a general kind of rule of thumb that when there's somebody as president who is not particularly supportive of the environment, that memberships in environmental organizations go up, which is kind of what you're saying. Giving to environmental organizations goes up. So that's the positive side of it. But I don't think we know yet. And I'm a very optimistic person and can only hope that he won't do too much damage.
Any other questions? I'm trying to think if I have a question because this is, in general, this is near and dear to me, coming from a similar background to Patty, starting in a cold climate and then coming to California. And I think I'm going to use my own experience to just simply say, where did your sort of fundamental, who gave you your fundamental inspirations when you go back? Who and where were those fundamental inspirations to do what you do? And it might not have anything to do with architecture, but the sort of fundamental thinking, where did it come from? Someone in your family or an experience?
I've got two, and they were both architects. Well, one's an engineer. One was Filippo Brunelleschi at the Brunelleschi Dome in Florence. I went there as a teenager and was just kind of blown away by the whole story of how he made it up and the ingenuity and just that kind of approach to design. So that's not necessarily sustainability, but just that approach to design. And then the other one is Frank Lloyd Wright. I know, but I went to Falling Water in high school, and it just completely blew me away. And it's very deep connection to its site and context, and it just, yeah, it had a very big impact on me, and that was kind of set me in my path from an early age.
Thank you.
And mine's Frank Lloyd Wright as well. And it was due to organic architecture. You know, in high school, I actually ended up writing a paper about Frank Lloyd Wright. But I was trying to answer the next part of that, which is early on, and I believe this is probably from the same source, I became interested in passive solar design, passive heating and cooling, because it just made sense to use the sun. I mean, we have this beautiful free source of energy, and it's creating our climate. So why not use that to the greatest potential? And so I ended up doing an independent study before I was even admitted to architecture school in passive solar design, just because of that interest, wherever it came from.
I think for me, it's, we all grow up somewhere, and I think for me, it was I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, and it's a Mediterranean climate, and I think that has influenced my love to be outdoors and sunlight, and it's just sort of the vibrancy of that feeling of that climate and that scenery has influenced who I am today, for sure. Even though I don't live there, and I haven't lived in Los Angeles for a very long time, but when I go back there, I feel very like it's where I don't belong there to live there permanently, but it's a source of my development.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to thank you all for responding to my invitations and your fantastic panel. And
can I say one last
Mimi?
thing?
Yeah.
This is for the students, and we've touched on it. I really want to make a pitch for your political advocacy. You have a voice. You may not have a vote, but if you have a voice, please use it. If there are groups that you think are doing the right thing in this direction, then support them. You know, support them with whatever you can. Time. It may not be money, but time is very valuable too if you can get out there and spread the word. Education. You will know more than many people you may think about this topic. So don't be shy in talking to friends and family and really being advocates, because that's how we get the change that we're all asking for.
Mimi, I just wanted to say one last thing that I think will interest some of you. So Thornton Tomasetti, we do hire one summer intern, probably in about 2 weeks. The ad will go up on our website. We will be looking for somebody that has a commitment to sustainability. And so it's usually just for a summer internship. It's not a long-term position, but take a look at our website, apply through there, and let me know. Thank you.
I totally attend too. Thank you, and please everyone join me in thanking our distinguished panel tonight. This was great. Thank you so much.